Lindsey Haley, and I was originally born in, well, I guess you're originally born once, right?
Yeah.
I was born in El Paso, Texas, and my family has been in the El Paso area since the 1600s that we dated back. We were given, my cousin did some research and found that we were given a land grant from Spain. And so we discovered this on the 500th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. And so at that time, I was working at Spark, the Social and Public Art
Right.
Resource Center. And we were going to have an anti Columbus series of events, including a gallery show. And when my cousin gave me the news, I said, "Oh man, I can't jump on that bandwagon
Yeah.
because my own people did it too."
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
now we got proof.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like so. Yeah,
Wow.
since the 1600s, New Mexico, and I guess one of the founding cities was Santa Rita, which was a mining town.
Mm.
And so my great grandmother, um, Lola, moved there, um, and married my great grandfather, who's a Lucero, and that was the Lucero land grant.
Okay.
You know,
And what
and
was their background or relationship to the area?
well, my great grandmother had come from Durango in the 1880s, I believe, and they got married, and then they moved down to El Paso. But by this time, a lot of the land had been taken away. You know, and so there were some parts of El Paso that, I guess still belong to us, and so they settled there. And so it's part of the Lucero family, which goes back to the 1600s.
Wow.
But the last immigrant to come over to El Paso was my mother's father,
Mm.
and my Papa Ramon, and he came in 1910, and he came from Jalisco,
Mm.
and he was an infant, and his family was fleeing the revolution. And I called that part of the family, the Gomez family, the underachievers, because it's like they cross the river and it's like, get Dallas, get Austin, aquí nos quedamos, we're fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it's a joke, but
Yeah.
yeah,
That's funny.
yeah.
And then your parents' background.
My mom is, from El Paso, and El Paso being a border town, it's like Spanish, very prominent in the family. Everybody speaks it. And my biological father was white from Arkansas,
Mhm.
and he was stationed in Fort Bliss. And when he was stationed in Fort Bliss, that's when he met my mom. And my stepfather and my mother had been childhood sweethearts. And so he was serving time in Huntsville. And when my mother met my biological dad and sent him a Dear John letter.
Mhm.
And so, but my biological father and mother were divorced by the time that I was a year old. And so I didn't get to meet him until I was 28. And so, and then I didn't find out, and this was really painful. My mother had come to visit me. She had moved to Las Vegas, and she had come to visit me in January. And this was mid 1990s. And my biological father had called me. And during this time, I'm probably in my early 40s. And so my parents talked, and he called me to tell me that there was going to be a family reunion and to save the date. And I did. So my mom and I were watching TV, and she told me, she goes, "Do you want to know why I really left your dad?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, ya me dijiste, era bien mujeriego." And she goes, "No, no." And what happened, she told me the story. And my biological father had been transferred to Missouri. He was in the Army. And so she followed him. She left El Paso and followed him. And she had made a white friend, Betty, and they went to a lunch counter. And this is in 56, and they brought her friend Betty's lunch, but they didn't bring my mother's lunch. And when my mother asked them why, the waitress told her that they didn't serve Mexicans. And she said, si a mí me trataban así, me dio miedo cómo te iban a tratar a ti. You know, if they treated me this badly, I was worried about how they were going to treat you. And I asked her, well, did you ever tell my dad? And she said, no. And I said, why? And she said, I was too embarrassed. They did something cruel to her, and then she's embarrassed.
Wow.
And so she left, and my dad called me a couple days later to follow up on the family reunion. And his name, by the way, was Lindsey Haley. And my mother was Rosalina Martinez, or Gomez, it was her maiden name. And so my biological father called me, and I, I, I told him, I said, you know, when Mom was here, she told me the story that I think you should really know. And so I told him, and he was so quiet, like I could feel his heart breaking.
Right.
And he said, I wish you would have told me. I wish you would have told me. And he said that when they were in Missouri, my mother found out that she was pregnant with me and talked him into letting her go to El Paso to have me. She wanted her family nearby. But once I was born, he was now stationed in Boston. And he was writing her, like, when are you going to join me? And I mean, if Missouri wasn't far enough, imagínate Boston, you know, and her English wasn't that good. She was partly deaf, and so she dropped out of school in the 6th grade. And she could read and write in English, but she couldn't speak it that well. And so he said, I wish you would have told me. And I said she was too embarrassed. And so ironically, what happened after that is a week later, he has a heart attack and dies.
Oh, wow.
And then less than a month later, my mom has a heart attack and she dies.
Oh, wow. How long ago was this?
This was, I think this was like 95, 96.
Oh, okay, wow, yeah.
And so she told me that she got to tell me the story before she passed away.
Yeah.
And then he got to know. And so I was their only child.
Right.
From that union. And then when I was 4 years old, my mother reunited with her first love, which was my stepfather, who you know, Nestor Martinez, Nestor. And then they got married, and then had my sister Aurora and Larry and Tina. And so, but when I got to Venice, I decided that I was going to change my name from Lindsey Haley to Rosie Martinez. And I kept the fact that I was half white a secret for a really long time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because it was 1969.
Yeah.
You know, the white man was getting blamed for everything. Yeah. And I said, I don't even know this dude. You know, why am I going to be carrying a white name around? And then I lived right there in Oakwood, and so there were a couple of white kids of white families, and those kids got punked pretty bad. And I was like, nobody's watching my back. And then being a white girl, it's like, forget it. And then I never grew up knowing what it was like to be white. I mean, when I was in El Paso, the neighborhood that I grew up in, San Juan, was completely Mexican, and half the town was related to me. There was one African American family, and the only white people you saw was the teachers, you know. So, and Spanglish was my first language, Spanish.
You said that your mom she didn't go. She dropped out of school, or she went to what, 6th grade or something.
6th grade.
Is that some of your? Because you went to college too, correct?
I went to college for a little bit.
Okay.
But I technically dropped out of high school. Well, dropped out of junior high. I dropped out of school in the 8th grade. I went to Westminster, Broadway, Mark Twain for a year. And then in the 8th grade, I went to St. Mark's. And then I took off with Michael and Brooks' dad. I was 14, he was 17. he was moving back to Fresno. And
Right.
so he asked me if I wanted to come along, and I said, sure.
So, that too. So I was wondering if you saw things throughout your life happen to you or your family, and that's what maybe
No,
inspired you to do.
it was really interesting because no, I had no clue.
Yeah.
And my mother never expressed that she had ever been discriminated against. I know that when we moved to Venice, um, with the exception of the one black family that we grew up with in El Paso, I remember her telling me be to really be kind to African American people, to be very kind, porque han sufrido mucho,
Mm-hmm.
because they have suffered a lot. And so I was always into watching TV and reading. I loved reading. And there in Venice, well, when we first moved to Venice, we lived on Electric, where it's that triangle where Fifth comes on one end and Fourth,
Right.
and then right behind us was Westminster. And so there's this big greenhouse there, and it had been split. It was like a tenement house. And so we moved in there. And so right on what's now Abercrombie was West Washington Boulevard. And right on the corner was a neighborhood organization called NAAP. I don't know what it stood for, but they used to have a lot of publications like La Águila, and so I knew about like the Chicano movement, and then I knew that when the Chicano moratorium happened, that there were buses. There was the CSO on California too, that were going to be taking neighborhood people to the demonstration in East LA.
And what does CSO stand for again?
Community Services Organization.
Okay.
And I think it was Catholic run. I'm not sure, but they were very liberal. And that was the first place that I ever saw Chicano art. There were posters.
And how old were you?
At that time, I was 12,
Yeah.
because there was the Summer Youth Employment Program, and CSO was one of the agencies that was employing the youth. I lied and I told them I was 15, because you had to get,
Right.
and so I went to work at the Venice Free Clinic. But years ago, I remember I was kind of following metaphysics, and there was a woman that said that whatever you're going through when you're pregnant, somehow that child is going to adapt some of that emotional stuff.
Yeah.
And I've noticed it with my own children. And
I believe that. Yeah.
and so with my mother, I always had this sense of fairness and justice, and that's not fair, and that's not fair. And I remember as a kid, I must have been about 7, and seeing this old Juanito passed out on the street and crying, and us like telling my mom, we got to go get this man, take him home.
Yeah.
I mean, I just had that feeling. And so coming into Venice in the political heyday of what it was in 1969, and the political movements going on, I was very well aware of it.
Yeah.
And then I didn't get to go to the Chicano moratorium. Both my parents had to work, so I put the kids to bed, and I watched it on the news. And I was just expecting them to show the march. I didn't know that there had been a riot that broken out. And one of the images that I saw, it was black and white TV, was a sheriff had reached over to this woman and was beating her with a billy club. And I was 10, 11.
Is that when they killed Salazar?
Yes. August 29, 1970. So I was 11, and I think that's the very first time that I remember feeling rage.
Yeah.
And just swearing that I was going to do whatever I could with my life to stop that kind of thing from happening. And from that point on, you know.
Oh wow, that makes sense too.
Impressionable.
Yeah.
And I mean,
but coupled with the, like you said too, with like your metaphysical understanding of what your mother was going through. Whatever, I felt the same with my mom too. Like things she was going through at the time, with with the stuff around like I felt that's a component of a lot of my character and
Yeah,
impetus and stuff. Yeah,
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 and so that's probably why. But yeah, it was. I was very. I just remember my first morning in Venice, knowing that I just had this feeling of I'm exactly where I need to be,
yeah.
and I felt so centered. And I was 9,
Right.
and just like
So tell us. I mean, let's backtrack a little bit. Like from El Paso, like how old were you when you guys moved to Venice? Like kind of how that journey happened. How did you guys end up, decide on
yeah.
Venice or the West Side?
Well, it was interesting because my mother had left El Paso, and we went to go live with her cousin in the Central Valley near Fresno, a place called Reedley. And there was just farm work there. And my dad's cousins lived in Venice, Papillo and Raul. And they lived right off Venice Boulevard. And then Papillo lived off of Washington. And they told him, it's like there's no work here in the winter. There's no cosechas or anything like. And so my dad, when I say my dad, I mean my stepfather.
Right.
And so my dad moved in with them. He got a job. At that time, there was a lot of factories in the marina, like Redwood. There was all factories.
Yeah.
And so he got a job there and then saved up, got us an apartment, and then came to get us in Fresno in February, a month shy of my 10th birthday. Then we moved to Venice. And then, as it turns out, that my uncle, through marriage, my grandmother's brother-in-law, had family in Santa Monica, and his sister actually lived in Venice near the Circle. And so we had relatives on both sides of the family, which is interesting, So
Yeah.
I guess we were kind of meant to be there.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Describe someone like I guess your earliest memories as far as like with your mom and your family, and I guess in Venice.
Yeah, it
Just some
was,
things stand out to you.
yeah. Um, the place that we lived in was like a really old building. And I was used to old things because, I mean, I grew up in an adobe house, and most of the neighborhood of where I lived in El Paso were adobe homes. And so new and sparkly didn't appeal to me. I don't
Yeah.
know. And they did not have any street lights up in Venice during that time.
Yeah.
They were just starting to put up the street lights. Like they had street lights at the corner, and they were more orangey, but they weren't like white.
Right.
So it was kind of spooky,
Yeah.
And my mother and I, on a Sunday, we decided we'd gotten in, I think, on a Saturday, and then that Sunday, my mom goes, "Ven, vamos, we're gonna go look for a grocery store."
Right.
And so we walked up 4th Street. We ended up at Pioneer Bakery,
Yeah.
and we're asking people like, "Where's a grocery store?" And so we found Safeways, which is now
Yeah.
Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And just the sense of discovery, and then going to the beach.
Yeah.
And I always had this wild imagination. I wanted to see a mermaid. Like, I
Yeah.
kept looking out for the mermaid. And then I remember the part of the beach that we would go to, because we were like on Electric near Westminster,
Uh-huh.
is the wall.
Yeah.
We would go near the pipe,
Yeah.
and they had a big utility box, and I imagined that that was where the unknown sailor was buried,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
we would spend our entire days at the beach, and it was just fun and nice. And then going to Westminster School,
Yeah.
like, it was new to me. And then, ooh, with 2 stories,
Yeah.
and then right across the street from there was a malt shop, and it looked like a malt shop from like one of those musicals. It was the striped yellow and white striped
Right.
chairs and stuff. And yeah, it was an exciting to me. It was really exciting. And then the hippies. Oh, one of the memories that I have is at Westminster. So I'm in the fourth grade, and I've just started school there, and I started like in March. And that's when the teacher asked me, she had my paperwork. And we had been in Venice for nearly a month before I got enrolled in school. And so she asked me, what would you like to be called? And I said, Rosie Martinez. And she said, class, this is Rosie Martinez. I don't know how I got through school with Rosie Martinez alias, but even like in the
but
yearbook.
legally, your name was still Lindsey Haley on
Yes.
paper, right?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I don't, I relaxed. And Mrs. Brown was African American, and she was totally cool. And we were studying about Japan, and I love school. One recess, we see, well, right behind Westminster yard is the dog park. Back then, it was just a grassy, hilly park.
Yeah.
So we see that this band's setting up, and they're, testing and stuff, and these hippies are starting to go up there. And then it's lunchtime. We're all glued to the fence, and it's lunchtime, and we go, and they start playing A Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin, the long version, and people are dancing, and before you know it, people are taking off their clothes, and people are naked, and we're like, oh my God. And I'm thinking to myself, where did my parents bring me to? It's like, and then Charles Manson happened soon thereafter, and then you got to see just how scary the city could be. Not Venice, but just that awareness.
And growing up too, like and a lot of different, like even Richard mentioned it last interview, and a couple of other, older black folks who I've talked to, they said, that they weren't allowed to go beyond certain areas. And Richard said like something to the effect of like it wasn't official, but you can feel like there's a certain distance where if you went in certain areas, you weren't really welcome. Did you ever pick up on that growing up? Like in your, in just in general.
You know, uh, yes and no, and I think it's mostly instinctual.
Yeah.
That I realized when I was working for the city of Santa Monica that I had never gone past Wilshire.
Yeah.
And I thought, why not?
Yeah.
Like the Mullins there. I mean, what else is out there? And then, so I'd never been to like Montana, and those other streets. And I was like, why not?
Yeah.
I guess there was nothing. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know people over there. And so, no, I didn't. I think it was more like you stuck to what you knew.
Yeah.
And
how about going to like to different neighborhoods? Cause I know like Santa Monica, Culver City, West LA, we're all kind of like the four corners. We're all kind of like we're far apart, but then we're not at the same time. Like were there other like things you went to or partook in that were in different neighborhoods?
Yeah, especially quinceañeras. And you usually weren't invited. You crashed them, right? Yeah. Weddings.
Yeah.
And I remember going to dances at the American Legion Hall in Santa Monica. And more like weddings and parties, I mean, quinceañeras that were in halls versus people's parties, Yeah. Also, you take into effect that I left when I was 14, and back then, right before I left, I'd been cruising for maybe a year. Right. And so the people that we cruised with were from Venice, and no, just guys that we knew, and Michael and Brooke's dad had a lowrider, and so, and you know, guys that grew up with the family, that we called cousins, but we weren't related, and hanging out in somebody's alley drinking, and that was the extent of it. But I always made sure I went to confession. Yeah, because I had to get communion the next day.
So when you get like when you hang out the cruise, like what was like an average like scenario or night or day cruising with the folks?
Well, on Sundays you cruised PCH to go up to Temescal, and so that made a lot of people mad on PCH because you got six lowriders, and it would be friends of friends of friends of friends, and back then it was mostly Venice, Santa Monica,
Yeah.
or Venice, West LA, or I don't remember having too much interaction with people from Culver City. Maybe just because it was further away. I don't know. But going to PCH and riding slow, going 20 miles an hour, and people honking at you like fucking Mexicans.
Yeah, yeah. Because you guys be going slow too, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You couldn't go past 30 miles an hour.
But you guys never go cruise like out like past La Brea. I tell
Uh,
people because everything I tell people like everything to us like everything past La Brea is the east side, you know.
oh yeah, 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 yeah. No, Whittier Boulevard too.
Okay.
You know, Whittier Boulevard, and this was before. I don't remember going to Hollywood Boulevard until like the 80s. But yeah, it was mostly PCH.
Right.
And you got the ocean right there. I mean,
Yeah.
damn,
Yeah, yeah.
we had it made out
Yeah,
here.
no, definitely.
But the one thing of getting on PCH, it was having to go through Santa Monica. And Santa Monica cops were real jerks. I
Yeah.
mean, if they saw, and we try to like break up the line so that it would only be one lowrider and not like a gang of us.
Yeah.
Because if they saw a gang of us, they were going to stop us all.
Right.
And that had happened. And so it was kind of like having to circumvent the police department and hurry up and get on PCH and then meet up, and then start cruising.
There's still like lowrider discrimination that goes on, Like, recently we had a fundraiser for one of the homies. His son was in the hospital, and they're had like a little lowrider event, and it was like a little barbecue off the side. No, where the Rose parking lot ends on Rose and Ocean Park. So plans would have like these like actual LA municipal codes where it says no car clubs or lowriders, and it's like
Really?
yeah, I was like wow, like I was like it blew my mind. And we ended up staying because there was a lot of us, and we were able to kind of intellectually advocate for ourselves. It's interesting that that's still
wow. I didn't
persists.
know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Well, it's interesting because recently I watch a lot of TV. That's one of my pastimes. Is And there's an ancestry.com commercial that's really interesting. It's a Chicano family, and it's a woman, and says, and it's like, uh, we it's something about low riding. Like the family has been low riding for generations, and they showed their low riders.
Oh wow!
And it's like we didn't get. I forgot what the line is. It was like they were born into low riding.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool because I mean it's an expensive endeavor, and you're I just wish the stigma could kind of lessen up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was curious too, just kind of going back a little bit to like your family stuff. Like, I mean, because you know a lot about your family background too. Like, was there any kind of connections to like as far as like understanding like your indigeneity or any kind of indigenous background that you might have via Mexico or through Texas?
Yeah, no. I mean, Brooke recently did the ancestry, and um, American, Native American, uh, Indian, for sure. But in terms of which tribe or anything like that. And then, as much as I hate to admit it, but it is true, that I came from one of those families that didn't want you to play outside because you were going to get dark.
Yeah.
And so the way that they viewed indigena was backwards.
Yeah, pejorative, yeah.
And so and when a baby is born, and ay, que lástima, nació pretito, or oh, que cute, he's so güero. And so in my family in El Paso, because we have a lot of Spanish, I have cousins with blue eyes that are very light complected, who will have a sister that's darker, and so it's a real mix
Yeah.
mash. And then Brooks uh, and Michael's father, my first husband, um, Spanish is his ancestry is predominantly Spanish too,
Right. Yeah.
and so, but no, I wish that we did,
Yeah.
that, but no, it's one of those things that doesn't get mentioned.
Yeah, no, 'cause I'm just curious because some people have different relationships with how much they know or how much they got privy to growing up.
Yeah,
Even though it's obviously in our in our DNA and in our culture, it's just kind of disguised or minimized or
yeah.
whatever.
Well, I'm glad that that's changing.
Yeah,
I'm glad that that's changing, because self awareness, and especially of who we are and our histories, is important,
right.
so.
So you mentioned earlier too how the sense of injustice from the Chicano moratorium and like how did like some of that aspect of your work feel that type of work.
I in its various forms. Well, I think the latest has been writing.
Mm.
I would say that the last 40 years of my life, I have I have been using my writing as a means of advocating and doing it in different ways. I started writing as early as 7, that I remember, and then it was something that I kind of kept to myself, and it was a lot of poetry, and just writing journals kind of thing, and would read a lot. Like I read I Am Joaquin when I was 12, and so that fed me, and that was my gasoline. And I had an idea that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know how. So it was until I was about 21 that I met people who, it's like, oh, well, this writer started off this way. You should really start looking at pursuing this. And so I got into journalism, which to me was the easiest way for me to hone in on my writing skills and also get published. And so, and then deliver a message. And so, for the last 40 years, my writing has been predominantly in Chicano and Latino arts and culture. And so, one of the articles that I published was in La Opinión in terms of oldies. And this was published in the early 1990s, about how oldies are to what trio music and mariachi music is to the Mexican population. How they're generational. And so articles like that. That reveal part of our culture, and expose it to others who may not know or be aware of. And then also feeding our own cultura, our own community, and making us more aware of what's going on, you know.
How about share some like the milestones you feel you've had during your journey of writing, like some of the significant publishings or experiences you've had.
Well, I think my first milestone was getting paid, and it was through Lowrider magazine. I was a freelancer. I had a day job. I've had a day job since I was very young, and writing would be kind of secondary, right? And so one of the milestones there was that I got paid $50.
That was what year?
And that was, oh gosh, I was 24, so 80s, and um, yeah, and it came just in time because I had a flat tire. So I used the money to buy tires,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so that was a milestone, getting paid. And that was also a cover story. My first cover story, which I interviewed Paul Rodriguez
Oh, that's right.
when
Okay, yeah.
he uh, came out with the show, aka Pablo.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah.
And so
Channel 7.
uh, I was relentless. It was like calling the magazine and saying, "I want to interview him. I want to interview him," and just them saying, "Okay, fine." And then dealing with Paul's people,
Yeah.
and and just again, and so that was, I think, one of my milestones